Hello guys and girls, Board now back with you, and on this video I will be talking about the science fiction movie The Colossus of New York from 1958. And just to show you, I picked up the Blu-ray just the other day. Pretty cool cover, I'm sure you'll agree, and looked like it could be a bit of a sci-fi cult gem, so I thought I'd give it a go. The title alone had me hooked, I'll be honest with you. So the premise of The Colossus of New York is that a scientist, Jeremy, at the start of the film he's come up with all these like revolutionary ideas to basically solve world hunger and come up with all this advanced machinery. And he works with his father, who's also a scientist, and a bunch of other like quite highbrow sort of doctors or scientists or just suits basically. And things are going well, obviously, because his ideas are really getting good responses. He's seen as some kind of like genius. He has a family, he has a wife and a young son, Billy. But then before things obviously really get going with his career and things, he's tragically killed he's run over by a truck basically in quite I don't know if this is intentional, but quite a sort of darkly sort of funny type thing, because it's basically caused by Billy, his kid, in a way, because he like drops his toy or something in the road, and that causes Jeremy, ever the professional father, to run after it, and that's when he's hit by a truck. Now this of course all leads to the kind of idea of the film, which is then Jeremy's father, who's this mad scientist type figure, just can't let go of the experiments which Jeremy was undergoing, and he has this great belief that a genius like mind should be kept alive, and there's this whole sort of discussion about mind versus body, and the father is trying to push this angle of, well, we must keep the work alive, and the way to do that is to keep the brain alive. So obviously it leads to this madcap science fiction B-movie premise where he starts experiments with Jeremy's like his brain, and he puts it inside this like robotic body, so it's like this machine which you see on the picture, and he keeps Jeremy alive, or what he perceives as him being alive. And the idea is that he'll keep the work going with Jeremy, or Jeremy in this new version. But of course, with this being the sort of movie it is, things start to go wrong. There's a conflict between Jeremy, the kind of essence of him, the human essence, and obviously the robot, and that starts to blur the lines, and before we know it, there's all sorts of problems. We see, again, you might have noticed on the DVD, him like shooting people with his lasers. Ultimately he gets this idea later on in the film, then the way to sort of solve world hunger is actually to kill the people who are starving from it. It's almost like, well, if you eliminate them, then you don't have the problem anymore. So it's that classic sort of B movie. They've created a monster type premise, and these are the consequences. And obviously there's stuff with the family, because they don't know, or for most of the film they don't know exactly what's going on. They obviously believe Jeremy's still dead, and they don't know about the whole experiment. So obviously there's conflict there as well. So overall it's a solid film. I like a lot of the ideas of it. I think as a B movie it is quite entertaining, and there's some some campy sort of scenes that are like fun, and I do enjoy him just zapping people with his lasers. The lasers shooting from the eye. That has a really good visual sort of look, and some of the effects are quite cheesy, but I think they're cheesy in quite an endearing type of way. The way the humans kind of melt or disintegrate as soon as he zaps them. I guess that looks quite good though, considering it's 1958. Those scenes aren't too bad. I think one thing that maybe lets it down is then they never went full blown with it. They never had him really roaming the city or really causing chaos, because a lot of the drama comes from him. First of all, them trying to hide him, trying to hide the experiment, but then first of all, his stuff with his family. He's got also like an older brother who kind of has like a thing for his widow at one point, and there's sort of drama that's played there, which sort of isn't the best really, but so that they maybe don't go full blown with it like they could. I think also the longer the movie goes on, the more obviously you see Jeremy, and it does become a bit too sort of gimmicky. It's very sort of derivative of the Frankenstein story, even though it's not as much of a horror as that is, but you can see a lot of similarities with that story. The robot even looks quite similar to Frankenstein, that sort of design. And there's plenty of other like sci-fi movies that have kind of used similar premise or similar themes and probably done it better, to be fair. This doesn't quite run with it how you would hope it does, but it's a very solid B movie. I do like a lot of the ideas. There are fun moments in it. It's also only 70 minutes long, so that's a really good running time, I think, for this sort of film. Also, there's a really actually good piano score, this really eerie type music, which you don't hear that often in the film, but I think whenever it does come in, it does create a bit of suspense. So that was really well done as well. But I think early on it is sort of a film of ideas. I think you have, as I said, you can tell from the beginning, and the father is just like this mad sort of scientist who's just out of his mind, really. But there are like hints of satire, because early on in the film, like it opens actually with this scene of like a screening room, and they're watching like this like factory production in a documentary, and you've got like subtitles describing it, and they're all nodding approvingly, and there's almost like a throwaway comment of how this sort of machinery and stuff and this technology could put people out of jobs. You could like totally replace humans with it, or work human as factory workers. And I guess it's one of these ironies where these projects that Jeremy is doing, they are obviously for good causes. They are to like help or potentially solve world hunger, but it does come with this murky kind of drawback as well. This sense of, well, if you're gonna put human beings out of jobs, and not just a few, but like many humans, is that a drawback? Which obviously a lot of people would say it would. So I think an idea like that appearing in 1958 is actually quite advanced. They actually don't run with that much, but it's quite a nice idea. And also I really like the stuff with Jeremy's father and the argument he has. Again, it's really crazed, classic mad scientist sort of like shenanigans arrogance, but I do enjoy the concept and the ideas, because he kind of makes this argument that, just think, if you took like the brains of like geniuses down there, so he says people like Leonardo, or it was either him or Michelangelo, Einstein, various, geniuses, and you kept them alive. Just think, their work could have continued. Their work was cut short because of their death, and the fact that their brains weren't kept alive is pretty much what he's saying, even though it sounds like ridiculous. But I actually like that scene, because you have a back and forth between him and one of his like colleagues, where the other guy, John I think his name is basically saying, well, without the body, the brain can't function, sort of thing. The body, you need the body to make up the human being, and you need a soul. A soul is kind of key. And again, Jeremy's father just isn't buying into that. He thinks it's all about the brain, and so that starts off the whole idea. Then he should like experiment on Jeremy's brain, keep it alive, and recreate Jeremy almost. So, but I do like that debate. I like the body and soul versus like brain debate. It's a really sort of interesting scene, even though it's obviously quite hammy and it's in this B movie type sort of context. What else is there to talk about? I think, a lot of the ideas early on in the film it's quite solid stuff. I think, and initially when you see the robot and the start of it, I think that stuff is pretty good as well. I quite like the look of it. Obviously, they're quite limited because of the time period, but I do like, obviously, the eyes lighting up and some of the crackly voice. This idea that he's like the human side and the machine side, or whatever you want to say, are sort of like fighting each other, and he keeps like malfunctioning, like the experiments don't quite work, and the brother gets roped in at some point because he's obviously against this. But there's sort of the scene where like Anne overhears the first time they experiment and it goes wrong, and she says to the brother later, because he tries to cover saying it's like the dad, then he's just, ever since Jeremy died, he's just been going crazy. And she's like, well, that didn't sound like him, that sounded like Jeremy, I reckon. And as the film goes on, he does start to speak more as the robot, and we're meant to believe it sounds like Jeremy, but I'm not quite sure if it does. So I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit at the scene where she claims, well, that sounded like Jeremy. And they do stuff with the son as well. He sees Jeremy as the robot out at one point, and Jeremy starts talking to him, and slowly the cat sort of comes out of the bag, so to speak, and Anne, the widow, starts getting suspicious. But I think probably the more you see Jeremy slash the robot, the less convincing it gets. I think it does become a bit creaky over time and a bit too gimmicky and a little silly at times. Not then again that some scenes are silly in an entertaining B movie way. I think one big bit of dialogue I love is when you're getting like this relationship growing between Henry and Anne, and at one point, like, she's kind of starting to like really get frustrated with him and the situation, and he's trying to talk her down, and he says, you promised me we would go to Hawaii," which I just love that line and the delivery of it. And then he kind of kisses her, and then there's Jeremy in the background who sees it. So But just some of the things that kind of look a bit cheap and are a bit silly is the fact that Jeremy can like hypnotize people. So he hypnotizes his father at several points to get him to do what he wants, and he does that with the eyes. But that just looks really like hokey and silly. And there's a scene later on because obviously he finds out about something going on with Anne and Henry, so he he basically wants to kill his brother. So at one point Henry's run away because obviously the way things have gone, and the cat's kind of out the bag. And he calls the father on like the phone, and Jeremy's in the room, and there's this whole thing about how he can sense where Henry is, even though they're obviously in different locations. And he then hypnotizes the father again and gets him to set up a meeting between the two because Henry wants money. But just scenes like that, I think, are a bit overdone and a bit drawn out because you literally get the father repeating what Jeremy wants him to do. And that's one of those scenes where they could have just cut it and gone to the next scene because obviously you get the gist, you know what Jeremy's doing. So they could have just had a quick shot of the father being hypnotized and you could have got the gist, I think. I think it's kind of slows things down and is a little bit clunky. There's also a bit of an inconsistency in the fact that Jeremy slash the robot can like go through water because he does it when he goes to meet the brother because they're meeting like by a bridge or something. It's obviously like the Hudson River or something like that in New York, and he literally goes through water. We see him in the water, and then he comes up on the steps. And by logic, a robot couldn't do that because it would like malfunction. I don't know. I guess it might depend on what they made it out of, but I don't know. It seems a pretty common thing that robots, they would end up being rust in water. Doesn't seem to affect him, I have to say. As I said, I did enjoy the zapping from the eyes and the killing of people, the laser. And that just looks really cool, and that's pretty fun stuff. So we get to this big climactic scene at the end where he again gets the father to arrange this like public gathering. And this is when he has this idea about just taking out, well, first of all, like all these like scientists, like humanitarians who are coming up with these schemes. And he makes sure, it's kind of a weird thing. I'm not quite sure what his plan is, but he wants his like wife and his son to be there. Now, I'm assuming he had no intention of hurting them. I'm guessing that. I'm not quite sure what he was thinking. Then again, he's an unstable, malfunctioning robot. But it's this whole thing where he kills a bunch of people, he zaps them dead, and you've got this big setting, and his son kind of becomes sort of the hero because he goes up to him, and at this point he's been told it's "I'm your dad" basically, and obviously the wife has started cottoning on as well. And so the son's like, "You're bad, Dad, you're bad." And this is one of those like kind of like hammy sort of cheesy scenes because Jeremy says to Billy, "You're the only one who can stop me, son." And Billy then has to push this button. I'm not sure why Jeremy couldn't have pushed it, unless it's just too far back on him. But Billy then has to push this button, and you get this prolonged scene, which is meant to be quite dramatic, of Billy at first doesn't push it hard enough, and then he does eventually, and his father, obviously, that's it for him. He falls off the ledge. Big dramatic scene. But there you have it. that's the film, and we actually end with one of those like sort of shots that meant to say, hey, he's feeling emotion, even though he's a robot, because he sees his like Anne and Billy walking away, and he looks up, and he's basically sad. The tear like drips down him, or it. I should stop saying he, but a hybrid, I guess. But that's the film. Now, I will say the ending, which again probably does look a bit silly, but it's the sort of silly that I'm going to excuse just because I think I like the idea of it. I do like the idea of him having this humanity. Overall, I did enjoy the film. I liked a lot of the themes. I liked the B movie elements. But it wasn't quite, you know, a brilliant film, which it could have been. I think they could have gone a bit further with some of the ideas and just some of the B movie elements. There are definitely scenes that are a little too cheesy and don't quite work. But overall, it's an enjoyable watch. It's really worth watching. If you're into like B movie sci-fi's, I'd say it's worth checking out just so you can like tick it off. So I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. So that's my That's my review of the Colossus of New York. If you've seen the review, then let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you are new to the channel. And I'll be back with more movie reviews soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.